The bitter wind howled across the plains as Katherine Parker stumbled through the darkness, one hand clutching her swollen belly, the other pulling her tattered shawl tighter around her trembling shoulders. The first light of dawn revealed her tear-stained face, exhaustion etched in every line as she fought to put distance between herself and the home that was no longer hers. Williams, Arizona Territory, 1885, was not a forgiving place for a woman in her condition, unmarried, pregnant, and now homeless. Katherine's father had finally made good on his threats when he discovered she wouldn't name the father of her child. "No daughter of mine will bring such shame upon this family," he had roared before tossing her meager belongings onto the dirt road and slamming the door in her face. The sun crept over the horizon as Katherine's legs finally gave way. She collapsed onto a fallen log, her breath forming small clouds in the chilly morning air. The mountains loomed in the distance, indifferent to her plight. She had walked for miles, having no destination in mind except away from the whispers, the accusations, the disgrace. "Miss, are you all right there?" The deep voice startled Katherine. She looked up to find a tall man on horseback, his face partially hidden beneath the wide brim of his worn leather hat. His eyes, however, were visible, kind but cautious. "I'm fine, thank you," she replied automatically, struggling to stand, wincing as pain shot through her lower back. The man swung down from his horse with the easy grace of someone who had spent most of his life in the saddle. "Forgive me for saying so, but you don't look fine." He kept a respectful distance, hands resting loosely at his sides. "The name's Isaac Turner. I've got a small ranch about a mile from here." Katherine hesitated, years of proper upbringing warring with her desperate circumstances. "Katherine Parker," she finally offered, her voice barely above a whisper. Isaac studied her face, then glanced at her protruding stomach before respectfully averting his gaze. "Miss Parker, there's a storm brewing and you shouldn't be out here alone. I can take you to town if that's where you're headed." "No," the word burst from her lips with unexpected force. "No town, please." Understanding flickered in Isaac's eyes. He'd seen her kind before, women cast out, abandoned, left to fend for themselves in a world that offered little mercy for their circumstances. "Well then," he said, adjusting his hat, "I've got a spare room, warm food, and no questions that need answering right now. At least until this weather passes." Katherine weighed her options, which were few and grim. Die out here in the elements or trust this stranger. As if to emphasize her predicament, a sharp contraction seized her abdomen, causing her to gasp and clutch her belly. Isaac was at her side in an instant, steady hands supporting her elbow. "That settles it. You're coming with me, Miss Parker." Too exhausted to argue, Katherine allowed him to help her onto his horse. He mounted behind her, one arm secure around her waist as they rode toward the promise of shelter. Isaac's ranch was modest, but well-maintained, a small wooden house with a covered porch, a sturdy barn, and a corral where a few horses grazed. Mountains provided a dramatic backdrop against the brightening sky. "It ain't much," Isaac said as he helped Katherine down, "but it's home." The interior was simple but clean, with a stone fireplace, solid furniture, and the faint scent of coffee and wood smoke. Katherine sank gratefully into a chair while Isaac stoked the fire and put on a pot of coffee. "I've been on my own these past 5 years," he explained, moving around the kitchen with practiced efficiency. "Came west after the war with nothing but my horse and the clothes on my back. Built this place up from scratch." Katherine watched him, trying to gauge whether she had made a terrible mistake in coming here. But there was something reassuring about Isaac Turner, a straightforward decency that shone through his weathered exterior. "Why are you helping me?" she asked suddenly. Isaac paused, a coffee pot in hand. Because someone once helped me when I needed it most, he said simply. And out here, folks need to look out for one another. He poured her a cup of coffee. Now you should rest. That spare room is yours for as long as you need it. Catherine's lips trembled with gratitude. Thank you, Mr. Turner. Isaac, he corrected gently. We don't stand much on formality out here. That night, as the promised storm raged outside, Katherine lay in the small but comfortable bed, listening to the rain pound against the roof. For the first time in months, she felt safe. The baby kicked inside her, as if sensing her momentary peace. We'll be all right, she whispered, placing her hand over her belly. Somehow we'll be all right. The following days settled into an uneasy rhythm. Isaac went about his ranch work, and Katherine, desperate to earn her keep, insisted on helping with cooking and household chores despite her condition. They circled each other cautiously, two strangers bound by circumstance. One evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Isaac finally broke their unspoken agreement of silence. I don't mean to pry, he said, his voice gentle, but your time is coming soon. Is there someone I should send for? Family, the baby's father. Katherine stiffened, her hands clutching the cup of tea she'd been nursing. No, she said firmly. There's no one. Isaac nodded, accepting her answer without judgment. Then I'll ride for the midwife when it's time. Mrs. Donovan from the next valley, she's good at her work. You've done more than enough already, Katherine protested. I can't ask. You didn't ask, Isaac interrupted. I offered. There's a difference. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Whatever brought you here, whatever happened before, it doesn't matter to me. What matters is that no one should face such things alone. Katherine's eyes welled with tears she'd been fighting for days. My father threw me out when he learned of my condition. My mother stood by and watched. The man responsible, her voice caught. He denied everything, claimed I had been with others. Isaac's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. Some men aren't worthy of the title. I was a teacher, she continued, the words pouring out now. I loved my work, my students, but once the rumors started. She shook her head. Everything I built, everything I was gone in an instant. Isaac leaned forward, his eyes serious. You're still that person, Katherine. Still that teacher. Still that woman who built something of value. This circumstance doesn't define you. Their conversation was interrupted by Katherine's sudden gasp. Her hands flew to her stomach as a puddle formed beneath her chair. It's time, she whispered, fear and wonder mingling in her voice. Isaac was on his feet in an instant. I'll get Mrs. Donovan. You lie down. Everything's going to be fine. The next 12 hours passed in a blur of pain and determination for Katherine. Mrs. Donovan arrived, a no-nonsense woman with capable hands and a reassuring manner. Isaac paced the porch, occasionally chopping wood or tending to chores, but never straying far from the house. When the first cry of the baby pierced the early morning quiet, Isaac stopped mid-stride, his heart pounding. He waited, hat in hand, until Mrs. Donovan opened the door. A healthy girl, she announced with a tired smile. Mother's doing fine too, though exhausted, poor lamb. Relief washed over Isaac. Can I? Mrs. Donovan nodded, stepping aside to let him enter. Katherine lay propped against pillows, her face pale but radiant, a tiny bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up as Isaac approached, a soft smile curving her lips. Meet Elizabeth, she said, her voice hoarse from exertion. Elizabeth Marie Parker. Isaac stood awkwardly by the bedside, hat still clutched in his hands, staring in wonder at the tiny red face peeking from the blankets. She's beautiful, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Perfect. Katherine's eyes filled with tears. I don't know how I'll ever repay you for what you've done. Isaac shook his head firmly. There's nothing to repay. You and Elizabeth are welcome here for as long as you need." As winter settled over the ranch, Katherine and Elizabeth became fixtures in Isaac's once solitary life. The spare room transformed into a nursery, with a hand-carved cradle Isaac fashioned during the long evenings. Katherine regained her strength gradually, taking on more household duties and bringing order to the bachelor existence Isaac had maintained. They developed a comfortable routine, Isaac working the ranch by day, Katherine caring for Elizabeth and the house. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes in companionable silence. Katherine read aloud from the few books Isaac owned, her teacher's voice bringing the stories to life. Isaac found himself looking forward to these quiet moments, watching Katherine's animated expressions as she read, or observing the tender way she cared for Elizabeth. He caught himself standing in doorways just to observe them, a strange ache in his chest that he couldn't quite name. Spring arrived with a burst of wildflowers across the rangeland. One Sunday, Isaac hitched the wagon and suggested they have a picnic by the creek that ran through his property. Katherine packed a basket while Isaac carefully lifted Elizabeth, now 4 months old and beginning to smile and coo, into a cushioned box in the wagon. The day was perfect, clear skies, gentle breeze, the creek gurgling pleasantly as they spread their blanket beneath a cottonwood tree. Elizabeth lay on the blanket, kicking her legs and gurgling as butterflies danced above her. "She's growing so fast," Isaac remarked, watching the baby with undisguised affection. Katherine nodded, a shadow crossing her face. "Soon I should think about what comes next." "We can't impose on your kindness forever." Isaac's head snapped up. "Impose? You and Elizabeth have brought life back to this place." He hesitated, then plunged ahead. "To me." Katherine studied his face, searching for something in his expression. "What are you saying, Isaac?" He ran a hand through his hair, suddenly nervous. "I'm saying that I've grown accustomed to having you both here, more than accustomed. He trailed off, the words catching in his throat. Katherine reached over and placed her hand on his arm. "We've grown accustomed to being here too." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been building slowly, naturally, over the months they'd shared a home and a life. The moment was broken by Elizabeth's sudden fussing. Katherine scooped her up, cradling her against her shoulder. "She's hungry," she said softly. Isaac nodded, giving her privacy as she nursed the baby. He walked to the creek's edge, skipping stones across the water, his thoughts in turmoil. What right did he have to these feelings? Katherine had come to him in crisis, seeking shelter, not romance. And yet, that night after Elizabeth was asleep, Katherine found Isaac on the porch, staring at the stars. "I've been thinking," she said, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders as she sat beside him. "A dangerous pastime," he teased gently. She smiled, but her eyes remained serious. "I want to be honest with you, Isaac, about everything." He turned to face her, giving her his full attention. "I'm listening." Katherine took a deep breath. "Before I came here, I was teaching at the school in Williams. One of the school board members, a married man, pursued me relentlessly. I refused him multiple times, but one night he cornered me in the schoolhouse after hours." Her voice faltered. Isaac's hands clenched into fists, but he remained silent, letting her continue. "He forced himself on me," she whispered. "When I discovered I was with child, I went to him privately, thinking he would take responsibility. Instead, he accused me of trying to extort money from him, claimed I had been with other men. He went to my father with his version of events. My father believed him a respected businessman over his own daughter." Tears slid down Katherine's cheeks. "So now you know. Elizabeth was conceived in violence, not love. I would understand if you wanted us to leave." Isaac reached out, taking her hand in his. "Katherine, look at me." When she raised her tear-filled eyes to his face, he continued, his voice firm. "Nothing about this changes how I feel about you or Elizabeth. Nothing." "And how do you feel?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Isaac swallowed hard. "I love you both. I love the family we've become. I don't want you to leave ever. I want to raise Elizabeth as my own, if you'll allow it. I want to be your husband, Katherine, if you could see your way to having me." Katherine's breath caught. "Isaac, are you certain? There will be talk when people realize." "Let them talk," he said dismissively. "We know the truth, and that's what matters." Katherine studied his face, finding nothing but sincerity in his steady gaze. Slowly she leaned forward, pressing her lips to his in a gentle kiss. When she pulled back, they were both smiling. "Is that a yes?" Isaac asked, hope evident in his voice. "Yes," Katherine whispered. "Yes to everything." They were married 2 weeks later by the circuit preacher who visited the area monthly. The ceremony was simple, attended only by Mrs. Donovan and a few of Isaac's neighboring ranchers. Katherine wore a dress of pale blue calico, holding Elizabeth in her arms as she spoke her vows. That night, after putting Elizabeth to bed in the nursery, Katherine joined Isaac in what was now their bedroom. Nervousness fluttered in her stomach as she approached him, memories of her only other experience with a man threatening to overwhelm her. Isaac sensed her apprehension. "Katherine," he said softly, taking her hands, "we don't have to do anything you're not ready for. I'm content just holding you tonight and every night until you're comfortable with more." Katherine's eyes filled with grateful tears. "You're a good man, Isaac Turner." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I'm a man who loves you. That makes all the difference." They moved slowly in the weeks that followed, building trust and comfort in small increments. Isaac's patience and gentle nature gradually helped Katherine overcome her fears, until the day came when she welcomed his touch without hesitation or painful memories. Their life settled into a happy rhythm as spring turned to summer. Isaac taught Katherine to ride, and she often joined him for short excursions around the property, Elizabeth secured in a special sling Isaac had fashioned. Katherine started a small garden, and in the evenings, she sometimes taught Isaac arithmetic and literature, building on the basic education he'd received before the war. Word of their marriage eventually reached Williams. Occasionally, when they made the journey into town for supplies, Katherine would feel the weight of curious stares and hushed whispers. Isaac would straighten his shoulders and take her arm proudly, his presence a shield against judgment. One day in late summer, as they loaded supplies into their wagon, a well-dressed man approached them, his expression taut with anger. "So this is where you've been hiding," he sneered, his eyes fixed on Katherine. "With your bastard and some ranch hand." Isaac stepped forward, positioning himself between Katherine and the stranger. "You'll want to watch your tongue, mister, when speaking about my wife and daughter." The man laughed coldly. "Wife, how convenient, and that child is no more your daughter than." He never finished his sentence. Isaac's fist connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling into the dust of the street. The man scrambled to his feet, reaching inside his jacket, but froze when Isaac's hand moved to the revolver at his hip. "That's George Wilson," Katherine whispered, her face pale. "The school board member I told you about." Understanding dawned in Isaac's eyes. "Mr. Wilson," he said, his voice dangerously calm, "I know exactly who you are and what you did. Now I suggest you walk away and never come near my family again. Next time I won't be so gentle." Wilson glanced around at the gathering crowd, recognizing the hostility in their faces. Even in the frontier, certain behaviors were beyond the pale. He backed away, adjusting his disheveled clothing. "This isn't over," he threatened. Isaac stepped closer, his voice pitched for Wilson's ears alone. It is if you value your reputation and your life. My wife may be too much of a lady to publicly name you as her attacker, but I have no such compunctions. One more word from you, one more threat, and everyone from here to Tucson will know what kind of man George Wilson really is." Wilson blanched, then turned and hurried away. Isaac returned to Catherine's side, gently guiding her to the wagon. "Are you all right?" he asked, his hand steady on her elbow. Catherine nodded, though her hands trembled as she climbed onto the wagon seat. Elizabeth, oblivious to the tension, gurgled happily from her basket. The ride home was silent, both lost in their thoughts. When they arrived at the ranch, Isaac helped Catherine down, then unloaded their supplies while she took Elizabeth inside. Later that evening, after Elizabeth was asleep, Catherine found Isaac on the porch, whittling a small wooden horse. "You defended us today," she said, sitting beside him. "You called Elizabeth your daughter." Isaac set down his carving knife. "She is my daughter in every way that matters, and you are my wife, the love of my life. I meant what I said to Wilson. No one threatens my family." Catherine leaned against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "I've been thinking about something. I'd like to officially change Elizabeth's name to Elizabeth Marie Turner, if you agree." Isaac's arms tightened around her. "Nothing would make me prouder." The following months brought changes to their small family. Isaac's ranch prospered, allowing them to hire 2 ranch hands, which gave him more time at home with Catherine and Elizabeth. Catherine, drawing on her teaching experience, began tutoring the children of neighboring ranchers 3 days a week, transforming their front room into a makeshift classroom. Elizabeth thrived under the love of both parents. She took her first steps on a sunny autumn afternoon, tottering from Catherine's arms into Isaac's waiting hands, her delighted laughter filling the air. Her first word, appropriately, was "Dada," which brought tears to Isaac's eyes. As Elizabeth's first birthday approached, Catherine realized she had been feeling unusually tired. Certain symptoms confirmed what she had begun to suspect: she was with child again. This time Isaac's baby. She waited until they were alone, Elizabeth having been put to bed, to share the news. "Isaac," she said, taking his hands as they sat before the fire, "I have something wonderful to tell you." The joy that spread across his face when she told him was something Catherine knew she would remember for the rest of her life. He whooped loudly, then apologized for potentially waking Elizabeth before pulling Catherine into a gentle embrace. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby." "Are you pleased?" she asked, though his reaction had made the question almost unnecessary. "Please doesn't begin to cover it," he assured her. "I'm overjoyed." The pregnancy progressed without complications. Elizabeth, now toddling everywhere and beginning to speak in simple sentences, seemed to understand something special was happening. She would pat Catherine's growing belly, saying "baby" in her sweet voice. Isaac was attentive throughout, taking on additional household duties as Catherine's energy waned in the later months. He built another cradle, larger and more elaborate than the one he had made for Elizabeth, working on it during the winter evenings while Catherine read aloud or worked on baby clothes. In late spring, just as the wildflowers were beginning to carpet the range, Catherine went into labor. This time, Isaac was more prepared, having arranged for Mrs. Donovan to stay at the ranch in the final weeks of the pregnancy. Elizabeth was cared for by one of the ranch hands and his wife, keeping her distracted with the new foals in the corral. After 6 hours of labor, considerably shorter than with Elizabeth, Catherine gave birth to a robust boy whom they named James Isaac Turner. Elizabeth was fascinated by her new brother, carefully patting his head under Catherine's watchful eye. "2 beautiful children," Isaac marveled, looking from James to Elizabeth. "How did I get so lucky?" Katherine smiled, tired but radiant. I ask myself the same question every day. As the years passed, the Turner family continued to grow and thrive. 2 years after James's birth, Katherine delivered twins, a boy and girl they named William and Sarah. The ranch expanded as well, with Isaac acquiring additional land and building a larger house to accommodate their growing family. Katherine's makeshift school evolved into a proper classroom, with a small building constructed specifically for that purpose near the main house. Children from miles around attended, giving Katherine the opportunity to return to the teaching career she had loved. Elizabeth grew into a thoughtful, intelligent young woman who shared her mother's passion for education. James proved to be the spitting image of his father, both in appearance and in his natural affinity for ranch work. The twins, Will and Sarah, were as different as night and day. Will quiet and studious, Sarah spirited and adventurous. On the 10th anniversary of their marriage, Isaac surprised Katherine with a special gift, the deed to the ranch, officially registered with both their names. "I wanted to be clear to everyone that this place belongs to both of us," he explained. "We built this life together, and everything I have is yours." Katherine, touched by the gesture, presented him with her own surprise, a family portrait she had commissioned during her last trip to Flagstaff, showing all 6 Turners dressed in their Sunday best. "To remind us of how far we've come," she said as Isaac admired the portrait, emotion evident in his face. That night, after the children were asleep, they sat on the porch swing, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. "You ever think about that first day?" Isaac asked, his arm around Katherine's shoulders. "When I found you by the road," Katherine nodded, leaning into his embrace. "Often. I was so frightened, so alone. I couldn't imagine then what my life would become, how much joy was waiting just around the corner." Isaac kissed the top of her head. "I knew the moment I saw you that you were special. I just didn't know how completely you would change my life." "We changed each other's lives," Katherine corrected gently. "You gave me shelter when I needed it most, but you also gave me love, respect, partnership. You helped me rebuild my confidence when it was shattered. And you," Isaac countered, "brought warmth and purpose to a lonely existence. You made this place a home. You gave me a family, something I never thought I'd have after losing my parents so young." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the swing creaking softly as they rocked. "I've been thinking," Isaac said eventually. "Elizabeth is 13 now. In a few years, she'll be wanting more education than we can provide here. Perhaps we should consider sending her to the academy in Denver. Your old headmistress, the one who writes to you, sometimes she mentioned scholarships in her last letter." Katherine smiled, touched by his thoughtfulness. "I've been thinking the same thing. Elizabeth has a quick mind. She deserves every opportunity we can give her." "And the others too, when their time comes," Isaac added. "Whatever path they choose, I want them to have the freedom to pursue it." "Even if it takes them far from the ranch?" Katherine asked, knowing how much the land meant to Isaac. He nodded without hesitation. "Even then. Though I hope at least one of them might want to take over someday." "James shows every sign of following in your footsteps," Katherine observed. "He shadows you constantly." Isaac chuckled. "That he does, but it needs to be his choice, not an obligation." He paused, then added more seriously, "I never want any of our children to feel trapped by circumstance, the way you once were." Katherine turned in his arms, resting her hand against his weathered cheek. "You are a remarkable man, Isaac Turner. I fall more in love with you every day." Isaac captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "And I with you, Katherine Turner." The following years brought both joys and challenges. Elizabeth did indeed attend the academy in Denver, excelling in her studies and eventually becoming a teacher herself. James, as expected, remained at the ranch, learning every aspect of the operation from Isaac. The twins blazed their own trails while becoming a doctor after studying in San Francisco. Sarah, surprising everyone by joining the territorial government as a clerk, one of the few positions open to women at the time. As Katherine and Isaac entered middle age, they found themselves increasingly involved in community affairs. Isaac served on the town council, while Katherine helped establish William's first proper school building, serving as its headmistress until younger teachers could be brought in from the East. Their 20th wedding anniversary coincided with Arizona's preparation for statehood. The celebration was held at the ranch, attended by all 4 children, Elizabeth home from her teaching position in Prescott, James with his new wife, and the twins returning from their respective pursuits. "I have an announcement," Elizabeth said during the family dinner. She glanced nervously at her parents before continuing. "I've been offered a position with a new girls' school opening in Phoenix. It's an opportunity to help shape the curriculum, to create something meaningful for the next generation." "That's wonderful news," Katherine said warmly, reaching across the table to squeeze her daughter's hand. "There's more," Elizabeth added. "The school is being named after someone who has inspired countless students with her dedication to education, her courage, and her belief in second chances." She smiled at Katherine. "The Katherine Turner Academy for Girls will open its doors next fall," Katherine gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Elizabeth, I don't know what to say." "You deserve the recognition, Ma," James interjected. "Everyone from here to Flagstaff knows what you've done for education in this territory." Isaac beamed with pride. "I can't think of a more fitting tribute." Later that evening, after the celebrations had wound down and the younger generation had retired to their rooms, Katherine and Isaac once again found themselves on the porch swing, a familiar position from which they had watched countless sunsets over the years. "I never imagined this life," Katherine mused, her head resting on Isaac's shoulder. "That frightened young woman on the road that day couldn't have dreamed of all this children to be proud of, work that matters, recognition." She turned to look at her husband. "And most importantly, love. Real, enduring love." Isaac's eyes, though creased now with laugh lines, held the same warmth they had when he'd first found her. "You know, I used to wonder why fate put me on that road at exactly that moment. Now I know everything in my life was leading me to you, Katherine. Every step, every decision brought me to where I needed to be when you needed someone most. And now look at us," she said softly. 20 years, 4 children, grandchildren on the way. James and his wife were expecting their first child in the winter. "I'd do it all again in a heartbeat," Isaac assured her, bringing her hand to his lips. "Every moment, every challenge, it was all worth it to build this life with you." As the stars emerged in the vast Arizona sky, Katherine reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From desperation to triumph, from solitude to family, from shame to honor, the path hadn't always been easy, but it had led to a life richer and more fulfilling than she could have imagined in those dark days before Isaac found her. "What are you thinking?" Isaac asked, noticing her contemplative silence. Katherine smiled, squeezing his hand. "I'm thinking about second chances and how sometimes what seems like the end of everything is really just the beginning." Isaac nodded, understanding perfectly, as he always did. "To beginnings, then," he said softly, kissing her temple. "To beginnings," Katherine echoed, settling comfortably against him as the night deepened around their home, the home they had built together, brick by brick, day by day, with love as its foundation. The years continued to unfold, bringing changes both expected and surprising. James and his wife gave Isaac and Katherine their first grandchildren, 3 boys who brought new energy and laughter to the ranch. Elizabeth remained dedicated to her school, never marrying but finding fulfillment in mentoring generations of young women. Will established a medical practice in Flagstaff, marrying a nurse who shared his commitment to healing. Sarah, to everyone's astonishment, became involved in the women's suffrage movement, traveling throughout the newly established state of Arizona to advocate for women's right to vote. As they entered their 60s, Isaac and Katherine began to step back from daily ranch operations, allowing James to take over most of the management. They focused instead on enjoying their grandchildren and pursuing interests they'd had little time for during their busier years. Isaac took up woodworking more seriously, crafting furniture that became sought after throughout the region. Katherine wrote educational materials and a memoir of her teaching experiences that was published by a small press in Phoenix. Their 30th anniversary was marked by a community celebration in Williams, recognizing not only their enduring marriage, but also their contributions to the area. The schoolhouse where Katherine had taught displayed a plaque honoring her years of service, and the town council presented Isaac with a commendation for his role in developing sustainable ranching practices that had influenced many in the region. "They're making such a fuss," Katherine whispered to Isaac during the ceremony. "We only did what seemed right at the time." Isaac squeezed her hand. "Sometimes doing what's right changes more than we realize." That night, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and friends who had become like family over the decades, Katherine found herself overwhelmed with gratitude. "I keep thinking of that frightened girl on the road," she confided to Elizabeth as they watched Isaac playing with his youngest grandson. "How close she came to giving up that day." Elizabeth followed her mother's gaze. "I'm glad she didn't, for all our sakes." "So am I," Katherine said softly. "So am I." As they approached their 40th anniversary, age began to take its inevitable toll. Isaac's back, stressed by years of ranch work, caused him increasing pain, though he rarely complained. Katherine's eyesight dimmed, making her beloved reading more difficult. Yet they faced these challenges as they had faced all others together, with grace and humor. "You're still the most beautiful woman I've ever seen," Isaac would tell Katherine when she fretted over gray hair and wrinkles. "And you're still the handsomest cowboy in Arizona," she would reply, smoothing his silver hair away from his forehead. Their children worried about them living alone as they aged, but both Isaac and Katherine insisted on remaining at the ranch as long as possible. James and his family lived in a newer house built on the property, close enough to provide help when needed but far enough to give the older couple their privacy. On the morning of their 45th anniversary, Isaac woke before dawn, a plan forming in his mind. Despite his stiff joints, he slipped out of bed without waking Katherine and made his way to the kitchen. With careful attention to detail, he prepared her favorite breakfast sourdough biscuits, honey from their own hives, and coffee just the way she liked it. When Katherine emerged from the bedroom, she found the table set with wildflowers and the good china they rarely used. "Isaac Turner, what's all this?" she asked, delight evident in her voice. "Just thought I'd remind my bride that she married a man who can occasionally be romantic," he replied with a wink. After breakfast, Isaac surprised her further with a small wooden box. Inside lay a delicate silver pendant shaped like a book, with their initials and anniversary date engraved on the cover. When opened, it revealed tiny photographs of their family children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. "Isaac, it's exquisite," Katherine breathed, running her finger over the detailed engravings. "Turn it over," he urged on the back. A simple inscription read, For the woman who wrote our story with love." Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "All these years and you still surprise me." Isaac helped her fasten the pendant around her neck, his fingers still nimble despite arthritis. "I planned to keep surprising you for many years to come, but fate had other plans." Just 3 months later, Isaac suffered a stroke while checking fence lines with James. Though he survived, his right side was weakened, and his speech became slightly slurred. Katherine, ever the teacher, worked patiently with him on exercises to regain his faculties, celebrating each small improvement. "I'm slowing you down," Isaac lamented one evening as Katherine helped him with his therapy. Katherine shook her head firmly. "Nonsense. We're just adding another chapter to our story." Their roles shifted as Isaac's recovery progressed, Katherine becoming the caregiver. Isaac learning to accept help with tasks he had always performed independently. But through it all, their fundamental partnership remained unchanged, anchored in the deep respect and affection they had built over nearly half a century together. On a crisp autumn day 5 years after his stroke, Isaac asked James to saddle 2 horses, his own gentle gelding and Katherine's favorite mare. "Pa, are you sure about this?" James asked, concern etched on his face. Isaac nodded, determination in his eyes. "Your mother and I need this. Just around the property at a walk, we'll be fine." When Katherine saw the saddled horses, she hesitated. "Isaac, is this wise?" "Maybe not," he admitted. "But it's necessary, trust me." She did as she always had. With James's help, they mounted up and rode slowly toward the creek where they had shared their first picnic so many years ago. The trees were ablaze with autumn colors, and the air held the crisp promise of winter. "Remember that day?" Isaac asked as they dismounted near the old cottonwood, now much larger than it had been when Elizabeth was a baby. Katherine smiled, settling onto the blanket James had packed for them. "Of course. It was the first time I realized I was falling in love with you." Isaac's eyes crinkled. "For me too. Though I think I started falling the moment I saw you on that road." They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the creek and watching golden leaves drift down around them. "I wanted to bring you here today because this place marks the beginning for us," Isaac said finally. "The real beginning, when we stopped being 2 wounded souls taking shelter together and started becoming something more." Katherine reached for his hand. "It's been quite a journey from that day to this." "The best journey of my life," Isaac agreed. "And I wanted to thank you, Katherine, for taking a chance on a lonely cowboy, for building a family with me, for these decades of love that have been the greatest blessing a man could ask for." Something in his tone made Katherine study his face more closely. "Isaac, what is it?" He smiled reassuringly. "Nothing to worry about, just feeling reflective, I suppose. Looking back on our life together, all we've built, all we've overcome. I'm proud of us, Katherine, proud of you." They rode back to the ranch as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the land that had been their home for so long. That evening, surrounded by family gathered for Sunday dinner, Isaac seemed especially content, watching his children and grandchildren with a quiet joy that touched Katherine's heart. Later, as they prepared for bed, Isaac took longer than usual with his evening prayers, thanking God specifically for each family member and for the years he had shared with Katherine. "Such a thorough accounting tonight," Katherine teased gently as he finally slipped under the covers beside her. Isaac gathered her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Just making sure the Almighty knows how grateful I am." In the morning, Katherine woke to find Isaac still beside her, peaceful in appearance but gone from this world. The doctor later said it had been his heart, quick and painless in his sleep. The grief was overwhelming, but Katherine found strength in the love that surrounded her. "Children, Grandchildren, friends, and neighbors rallied around her, offering support and sharing stories of the man who had touched so many lives with his quiet generosity and unwavering integrity. At the funeral, Catherine stood tall despite her sorrow, Elizabeth on one side, James on the other. As she listened to the tributes from family members, from ranch hands who had worked for Isaac, from townspeople whose lives he had improved through his community service, she felt a profound gratitude mingling with her grief. "He knew," she said softly to Elizabeth as they returned to the ranch afterward. "That day at the creek, he was saying goodbye." Elizabeth squeezed her mother's hand. "He wanted your last outing together to be somewhere special." In the months that followed, Catherine found purpose in preserving Isaac's legacy. She completed the memoir she had been working on, expanding it to include their love story and the ranch's development. The book, published the following year, became a cherished account of frontier life and enduring love. Though invited to live with any of her children, Catherine chose to remain at the ranch with James and his family nearby. "This is home," she explained simply. "Every corner holds memories of your father." On what would have been their 50th anniversary, the entire extended family gathered at the ranch. James unveiled a surprise. He had been working on for months a stone bench placed by the creek where Isaac and Catherine had shared so many important moments. Engraved on a brass plaque were the words, "Isaac and Catherine Turner, a love story begun in kindness, built with courage, sustained by faith, 1885–1935. Catherine ran her fingers over the engraving, tears flowing freely. "It's perfect," she whispered. That evening, as twilight settled over the land, Catherine sat on the porch alone, the weight of Isaac's absence heavy yet somehow companionable, as if his spirit lingered near. She closed her eyes, remembering his face that first morning, cautious but kind as he offered shelter to a desperate stranger. "Thank you," she whispered to the gathering stars, to the memory of the man who had changed everything. "For finding me when I was lost, for loving me when I needed it most, for the gift of our life together." A gentle breeze stirred the wind chimes Isaac had hung years ago, their musical tones carrying across the yard. Catherine smiled, finding comfort in the familiar sound and in the knowledge that though Isaac was gone, the love they had built endured in their children, in the land they had tended, and in her heart that would carry him always. As darkness fell completely, Catherine rose from the porch swing and went inside to the home they had created, a home that would continue to shelter generations of Turners, each one carrying forward the legacy of love and courage that began on a dawn-lit road when a cowboy stopped to help a woman in need, forever changing both their destinies.